The room is completely silent. And somehow, that's the problem. You're tired. You've been tired for hours. You finally get into bed, close your eyes, and the silence feels almost loud. So you reach for your phone, pull up an app, put on some rain, a fan, a podcast you've already heard 3 times, whatever works. And then, finally, you start to drift. If you just recognized yourself in that, this video is going to explain something about you that you probably never had a name for. Because this isn't a sleep problem. It's actually a window into how your brain is wired and what it's been quietly protecting you from, possibly for years. Let's start with something that surprises most people the first time they hear it. Silence, for a lot of brains, is not neutral. It's not restful. It's activating. And I don't mean that poetically. I mean it literally. In a quiet room, certain brains don't slow down, they speed up. The absence of external input doesn't feel like peace. It feels like an open invitation for every unresolved thought from the day to walk right in, sit down, and make itself comfortable. People who need background noise to sleep aren't afraid of silence exactly. What they're responding to is what silence does to the mind when there's nothing else competing with it. Here's what's interesting. Researchers estimate that somewhere between 30 and 50% of people regularly use some form of sound to fall asleep. Fans, white noise, music, TV in the background. That's not a quirk. That's a significant portion of the population doing the exact same thing and never quite understanding why. So what's actually going on? There are 4 psychological explanations, and they're more connected to who you are as a person than you might expect. The first one is something called cortical arousal. Your brain has a baseline level of activity, a kind of resting hum, but that baseline isn't the same for everyone. Research going back to the psychologist Eysenck suggests that some people are naturally higher in cortical arousal. Their nervous system runs hotter, in a sense. It doesn't need much to stay switched on. For these people, when external stimulation disappears, when the noise of the day finally drops away, the brain doesn't read that as a signal to wind down. It reads it as a vacuum, and the brain hates a vacuum. So it fills one. With what? With thought, with replay, with the conversation from this morning, the thing you forgot to do, the comment someone made 3 weeks ago that still doesn't quite sit right. Background noise solves this, not because it's soothing in some abstract sense, but because it gives the brain just enough to hold on to, enough input to stop generating its own. It's almost like handing a restless child something to squeeze so they stop reaching for everything else in the room. The important thing here is that this isn't a flaw. People with higher cortical arousal tend to be more sensitive, more attuned to their environment, and often more creative. The same brain that won't quiet down at midnight is frequently the one that catches things everyone else walks right past. The second reason is more emotional, and for some people, it's the real one. Psychologists refer to something called sensory gating, the brain's ability to filter out irrelevant input. But what gets talked about less is the role background noise plays not just in filtering sound, but in managing internal states. For people who grew up in environments that weren't always calm, homes that were loud, unpredictable, or emotionally charged, the nervous system learned something early on. Silence can come before something difficult. The silence before an argument. The silence in a house that should have been noisier. The silence that meant someone wasn't there who should have been. The brain is extraordinarily good at forming associations, and if silence got paired enough times with tension, with unease, with waiting for something to happen, then silence, even decades later, doesn't feel safe. It feels like the moment before. Background noise becomes an anchor, a signal that says, right now, the environment is stable. Right now, nothing is about to happen. You can let go. This isn't a trauma response in any dramatic sense. It can be incredibly subtle, more of a low-level pattern than anything you'd consciously recognize. But it explains why, for some people, complete silence feels like holding your breath. There's a third explanation that connects directly to how these brains process thought. Researchers studying activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain that activates when you're not focused on a specific task, have found that some people show significantly higher activity in this network during rest. It's the network responsible for mind wandering, self-reflection, imagining future scenarios, revisiting the past. In other words, when there's nothing to focus on, certain brains don't go quiet. They go inward, hard. And going inward at midnight, when you're trying to sleep, isn't always a pleasant experience. The default mode network doesn't distinguish between productive reflection and anxious rumination. It just runs. Background noise acts as a very gentle anchor back to the outside world. It gives that network just enough of a soft task, tracking a sound, following a rhythm, to reduce the intensity of that inward pull. Not stop it, just soften it enough to slip through into sleep. This is also why the specific type of noise tends to matter more than people realize. Music with lyrics can actually backfire. Your language centers activate and you end up listening instead of drifting. Rain, fans, brown noise, ambient sound. These work precisely because they're complex enough to occupy attention, but not structured enough to demand it. The fourth reason is the simplest, and probably the most underestimated: conditioning. Whatever sound was present during sleep in your early years became neurologically linked to the state of sleep itself. A fan running in the background, the television on in the next room, rain against a window, the hum of a busy street outside. Over time, the brain doesn't just tolerate those sounds, it starts to use them as a cue, a sleep trigger. The sound becomes part of the ritual, and the ritual becomes part of the signal that tells your body it's time to let go. It's the same mechanism behind why some people can only sleep in complete darkness, or why others need a specific pillow, or why a hotel room, even a comfortable one, makes sleep harder. The context shifted. The cues aren't there. For background noise sleepers, the cue is sonic. Remove it, and the brain becomes slightly disoriented, not distressed, just confused. A quiet, "Where is this?" It's waiting for a signal that never comes. Here's what I want you to take from all of this. Needing background noise to sleep is not a weakness. It's not something to fix. Every explanation we just looked at, higher cortical arousal, emotional association, an overactive default mode network, conditioned cues, these are all characteristics of a very specific kind of mind. A mind that processes deeply, a mind that stays engaged with the world longer than most, a mind that forms strong associations and holds on to them. These aren't liabilities. In most contexts, creativity, empathy, attention to detail, problem solving, they're genuine strengths. The background noise isn't a crutch, it's a tool. And using it doesn't make you anxious or damaged or dependent on something you shouldn't need. It makes you someone who figured out, often completely intuitively, exactly what your brain needs in order to let go at the end of the day. That's not a problem. That's actually pretty resourceful. If any of this felt accurate, if you recognized yourself or someone you know in one of these 4 patterns, I'd genuinely like to know which one landed. Drop it in the comments. And if you want to keep going, the next video is about people who always need to sit with their back against something solid before they can fully relax in a room. It connects to this one in ways that might surprise you. I'll see you there.